Hi there, this is Alexander Hall here to give you a full synopsis of Thoroughly Modern Millie. So I'm going to be talking to you a lot about what I analysed from watching the film and kind of seeing like the differences that came in from the stage version from what I read from other research elsewhere. So what I want to kind of give to you is my full analysis from what I saw from the film, which was made back in 1967, which starred Julie Andrews as Millie, and it had Mary Tyler Moore as Dorothy, and there was James Fox as Jimmy Smith, and then of course John Gavin, who played the role of Trevor Graydon. So this film was composed by a good composer called Elmer Bernstein, who actually has the same structure for the surname as Leonard Bernstein, although the only difference is it's Elmer Bernstein and Leonard Bernstein, which I thought I might want to mention out. And everyone thought from looking at the surnames that they had a relationship with each other, like brothers or so on and so forth, but actually they weren't. So they were actually quite close friends from what I gathered when they were alive. So yeah, this film was based back in New York back in 1922, which it started off with this woman called Millie Dilmont, who is living on her own, who is trying to find a job and trying to find a very really rich someone who to fall in love with, who's a boss, who is rich and all that kind of thing. And so what happens is she stays in this hotel called the Priscilla Hotel, and she's a very big fan of modern fashion. So she would go out and get really rich clothing, which was produced back in the 1920s at that point, and that she would really want to update her own fashion on a regular basis, because she was kind of one of those women who you'd probably see as ones who really like to take the first pick of something that's just come out and just got released for the first time. And so yeah, so she meets up with this she stays in the Priscilla Hotel, which is run by this woman called Mrs. Mears. And when she's going back into the hotel, she meets this woman who's quite coincidentally sleeping in the opposite room to Millie. Her name is Dorothy, and unfortunately she's an orphan who is trying and get some kind of living out of New York, because she's in the same zone. She really needs she needs to be somewhere where she can get a lot of money. And so in this circumstance, of course, Millie and Dorothy are trying to aim to get on well, and Millie's trying to be as welcoming as she can for Dorothy, because because they're neighbours, they need to try and look out for each other. And so during that time, they go to a social dance, which is down in the dining hall of the hotel. And then they find this man who just popped in out of nowhere, and his name is Jimmy Smith, who then just joins in this dance and gets everyone dancing with him. So he's kind of like this guy who really wants to try and be presentable and kind of give that kind of participation for everyone to get involved. And just from that point, you could tell that he was falling very fondly towards Millie. And so yeah, the two of them, Millie and Jimmy, then go out of the hotel and start driving along, trying to make love with each other. And during that time, when Jimmy was saying, you really are a cute girl. Do you mind if we can maybe meet up again? And Millie then says, well, if you're trying to fall in love with me, unfortunately, I don't know if I can say yes, because I need to go, because I'm going boss hunting. And in that time, what boss hunting was where you had to go out and get a man, go and get a job, and pretty much if there's a single boss, so someone who's who's a very wealthy boss, who's doing a very high standard job, who's getting a lot of money. And if they're single, she would want to go there so she can try and impress him enough to fall in love. So when they start to get together, that she can get a good wealth and get a lot of money out of herself, because back in those days, women weren't all about the personality, they were more about wealth, and that was the unfortunate thing back in those times. So yeah, and during that point, of course, knowing Jimmy, which I didn't mention before, was actually working for a paperclip. He's a paperclip salesman, and the only problem was with Jimmy isn't the most passionate paperclip worker. So he's not like, I would talk about it every day, I love my job. It's not like, he's not that kind of guy. I think he just kind of sees it as in like an average job, which doesn't really mean much to him, which is not like super passionate that he would want to deliver to the rest of the world. Whilst I think with Trevor is quite, because of course he's a boss, that kind of shows that he's got passion in his job. And if you're a boss, you have to be really, really passionate about what you do, and you have to have real strong logic about the particular subject that you're working on. So yeah, and I think from that point, that's when I think Jimmy is still trying to impress Millie, and so he then invites Millie, and of course invites Dorothy to go on like a plane trip, so he can try and kind of give Millie a bit of affection, a quite quiet affection, but in a way trying to give her that feeling of saying to her, I'm trying my best, I want to try and make you realize that I actually want to do a lot for you. And so yeah, they fly off to this place called Long Island, which was actually, from what I've heard, is that Muzzy, to go and see this widow called Muzzy, who was actually Jimmy's father's Jimmy's father's gardener. And yeah, that's when Millie found out that actually, Jimmy wasn't really reason he's not that passionate about paperclips is because, that was not what his family brought him up to do. He, because his father worked for gardening, that Jimmy isn't a fan of gardening. He's not a fan of gardening, and so Millie's kind of a bit baffled at why he didn't go to do gardening instead of not going into paperclipping, going into a paperclip sales. So yeah, Millie then gets completely confused at what she's doing, and she's getting mixed emotions going through her head, thinking, well, who do I love more? Who should I love? Should I love Jimmy or should I love Trevor? Who is going to help me? Who's going to get me somewhere? And that's where Millie and Muzzy then talk to each other and start to find something, trying to find out what would be the best option. And from their talk, Millie then starts to think, I think, do you know what? I'm going to go for Jimmy. Jimmy seems like the right guy, because Muzzy told her it's not all about wealth, it's all about personality. And Jimmy is the best example of someone with good personality, who doesn't think a lot about his richness, doesn't think a lot about, he just doesn't overthink it. He's a genuinely nice man. Whilst I think with Trevor is quite, a bit uptight and isn't really as bothered, who kind of just doesn't know the signals of that Millie's trying to fall in love with him. And Jimmy is trying to attract, and yeah, but with Jimmy's actually likes Millie, and is trying to make Millie love him. So I think at that point, that's where it all kind of gets in place, and then Millie is thinking, I'm going to go to Jimmy and say I love him. But then, yeah, Millie then sees just between her eyes that Dorothy and Jimmy are then hanging out in a room together, and then she thinks, yeah, he doesn't love me. I shouldn't have said the things I said. And then yeah, then she kind of gets very ignorant towards Dorothy and Jimmy after that event, and she completely ignores Jimmy and ignores Dorothy, and just kind of just tries to enclose herself away from those two, and then tries to make the effort of impressing Trevor, which to a degree doesn't work because unfortunately her efforts to make him love her did not work out, because what happened was they tried to go out on a date and Dorothy invited herself in, and they went out for a night out at the circus, which starred Muzzy, of course, who's actually a performer if you didn't know. And what happened was, at that point, Trevor and Dorothy kind of got a connection which Millie did not see until a point after the show when they went backstage and they went to congratulate Muzzy, and Muzzy went, "Oh, I didn't know Dorothy and that boss of yours are getting really close." And then that's when Millie goes on thinking, "Oh yeah, yep, he doesn't love me. I failed." And then that's when she just completely she goes into complete despair. And and then funnily enough, Jimmy is starting to get very needy and wants to give Millie one more shot, and so he keeps on going, trying to fight his way into the Sincere Trust, which is where Millie was working at that time. And and during that time, when he kept on making an effort to go in, the worker, who's the stenographer, Miss Flannery, kept on saying, "Just go away, go away. She doesn't want to see you again." And and Jimmy just did, and he just kept on trying and kept on going, and even got to the point where he was even climbing up the building just to go and see Millie. And as soon as he got there, Millie then saw that Jimmy was in danger, because he had climbed all the way up to the top building just to see Millie. And so Millie, she's going on saying, Trevor just wasn't the man for me. I just could not impress him enough. And so at that point, that's when Millie and Jimmy then said, "You know what? Let's just get a job together. Let's find a job that we can work at and get a good, well-paid job." And then it does not end very well. It doesn't turn out to be the job that they all really wanted to go for. So unfortunately, they worked in washing dishes at Tiffany's, which in a way was good in terms of wealth, but unfortunately, it wasn't the job that fitted them both. And during that time when they were washing, they were overloaded with so many dishes to wash and all that kind of thing. Then the Millie then goes straight into the restaurant where the customers are, and notices Trevor sitting there all depressed and all discouraged and really quite just worried. And he said, "Dorothy's gone. Dorothy's just gone. She didn't tell me anything. She didn't leave a note. She didn't say anything. And I just don't know what's happened to her. What's happened?" And so Jimmy and Millie then go and see him, and then that's where they all kind of travel together and travel back to the Priscilla Hotel, and that's where they're working out what's really happened to Dorothy and trying to find a similarity of what could have happened to Millie. So Millie is going on saying, that the women who have been in that room in that hotel have all been orphans. And then that's when they kept on going, if they've all been orphans, then who's taken these girls? Who's taken these women? And then they start going, could it be Mrs. Mears by any chance? And then they find out that Mrs. Mears has been stealing a lot of women and doing like white slavery, trying to steal white orphaned women, who trying to use them as slaves for immigration. So because her henchmen are Chinese, and they are trying to send all these orphaned women's out for sale and use them as slaves in China. It kind of gave you that reason why she kept on giving orphan women that particular room, so that they could grab them and use them as slaves. And so what happens is Jimmy dresses up as this orphaned woman who's trying to like trick Mrs. Mears into thinking that making her think that that Jimmy is the orphan woman, when actually he's disguised. And then during that time when Jimmy is invited up to that orphaned girl room, what happens is at that time Mrs. Mears then notices Trevor's car, and he's standing out waiting, and because she's then thinking, am I being watched or something? And then she then pokes a dart at Trevor's neck, which then pulls him into unconsciousness. So when Millie is trying to wake Trevor up when they are kidnapping Jimmy, that's when it takes them a very long time to get straight and follow the car where Jimmy's been taken in. And so what happens is they follow them straight into New York Chinatown, which is where all the slaves were kept. And when they found out what exact building they were being locked in, that's when Millie was then went on and just thought of catching a cigarette, and just took the cigarette, and then when she had finished with it, she threw it into the building, into a room which was filled with fireworks, which you could say it knocked down that building. And she did all that just to say, and she went and told Trevor to get all those women out and to save them all. And they saved each one of them. But of course, as you could tell, it retaliated Mrs. Mears, that they rushed out, they rescued all the slaves, but most of all they rescued, of course, Jimmy and Dorothy. And so what happened at that point was they travelled straight back, and then Mrs. Mears and the henchmen then chased after them. So they rushed straight off to the Long Island, which is where Muzzy lives. And because the henchmen and Mrs. Mears were outnumbered, they were fought straight down, and Mrs. Mears lost. And it all finished with Mrs. Mears arrested, and of course the henchmen then being migrated back to China. And so at that point, that's when Jimmy and Dorothy then explained to everyone that actually they were brother and sister, and that they didn't want to say anything so they wouldn't have any like confusion of such. So and it ends off with Jimmy marrying Millie and Trevor marrying Dorothy, which was the right balance, the right connection. That was the ones that really did work out in the end, which finished on a good happy ending. And that was how Thoroughly Modern Millie finished. So I have to say, from what I analysed and from what I thought of the whole film and what I thought of the whole storyline itself, it's one of those shows and one of those films that you watch and you just kind of get this real, you can kind of relate to it as modern day the modern day era of what's going on in day-to-day life now, that we get cons who are taking advantage of particular people. So of course, the fact that Mrs. Mears took advantage of orphaned women, that that can happen in modern day life now. It's so easy for these things to happen as technology is building, and that so many things are building up, and that they're good advantages, but in some sense there are bad advantages where illegal things can happen. And of course, with of course immigration, that can, in a sense, is a good thing to some degrees, but to other degrees it can be a bit worrying. And I think this is one thing that I find particularly, what I love about thoroughly Modern Millie, is the real thing that really stood out to me was that it kind of tells us that we should never judge, and we should never outnumber someone out just because of their wealth, or due to what kind of job that they're doing, or how they express their job as well. Because expressing your job is something that a lot of women really want. They want people to express their jobs as much as possible, but also to remember the most important thing: never go for someone just because they are wealthy. Find people who are really who really are nice, who are nice overall, who have genuine good common sense, and who don't judge anyone, who doesn't judge anyone for any reason. And that just because you might be poor, you might be rich, that as long as you have a good personality that you can relate to and that you can really engage to, then you're just as likely to get a good forwarding on your life as much as anything else. And I think what has been something that I've learnt an awful lot from this show and from the film is that we in general modern society, we get women who overthink how they need to look. We get women who pay stupid money for modern day clothes. You get men who pay stupid money for modern day clothes. I mean, even me, I pay crazy money for clothing, and sometimes I regret it completely. But yeah, in some sense, it just kind of shows that even though it was back in 1922, that these situations still have an impact on us today, especially in terms of kidnaps, advantages being made over people who might have a disadvantage of them. So if you're an orphan, you could be disadvantaged, you might be conned, particularly because of that. Someone could con you because you might be autistic, you might be conned because you're black, and you could be slaved. And slavery in general society is still a problem, especially if you look, even if you don't think about it here in the UK or in the US, that there's some form of slavery anywhere. Slavery is being used from our perspective. We know that there's slavery going on out in the Middle East, where there's war going on and where people are being treated because of their religion, and that they're being killed for it, and they're being discouraged not to not that they need to follow a particular religion even though they don't want to. It's things like that these things are still as relevant, even though it's a very different story. This is a very different story. It's nothing to do with religion, but it has that same effect, that no one should be taken or thrown away just because they might have a disadvantage to them, or there might be something that they cannot control. If you're an orphan, you can't control that, can you? You can't control that you're an orphan, because being an orphan just happens because your parents are dead, and you can't control if they die or not. And I think the one thing is that we need to be a lot more sympathetic to anyone, because we don't know what people have experienced. We don't know what has happened to them over their lives. We don't know how particular events have affected them in day-to-day life. There's so many things that I probably wish I could have actually given more chance to people in life overall. And sometimes you just don't know that, and sometimes it just comes out of nowhere, and you just cannot understand why you react the way you do with particular people, and you don't know what they're experiencing in life. And I think this is a great show and a great film that's made me think before I act, and give me the chance to give more opportunities to people elsewhere in life. And yeah, I think also you need to be very just civilized as a person. Don't overthink about your wealth, and just go for what you know is right for you, and just be a genuinely decent, humble human being, which was what Jimmy was. Jimmy was a very, really kind man who just wanted love, and who wanted someone who he could trust, and he knew that Millie was the right, trustworthy woman for him. And in the end, it ended with them together, which was what he wanted overall. And of course, that's what Millie wanted once she realised the real realities of what was out there for her. And I just loved I like how it ended, and it was just it just really made a massive difference in the whole storyline and how it affected me watching it. So yeah, and yeah, of course, for me, for my solo, I'm going to be doing What Do I Need with Love, which is done by Jimmy Smith, which is played during the point, which is not actually, this is the bit that's not in the film. So what happens in the stage version, it's during the point when Jimmy meets Millie and Dorothy for the first time, which was what we all thought at that time, when they go out dancing, and they go out, and then all of a sudden he takes them both clubbing, but then they find that, but then all of a sudden, because Jimmy is paying drinks for Dorothy and for Millie, that's when the police capture him, and then jail him for like a day, because in America, I think you get like a day in jail where you get put on a criminal record for doing something which the police have caught you for. And during that time, that's when he's in the jail, and he realizes, I love Millie. Millie's actually my love. I need her. And what do I do? How can I get her to love me? I don't know. And yeah, and then that's when it kind of builds on to where Millie then goes on to try and get to Trevor, and tries to make Trevor love her. And after that, of course, it again goes on to Jimmy inviting Dorothy and Millie to the Long Island for the first time to meet Muzzy. So yeah, it's been a brilliant vlog for me to do, and I cannot be any more happy with how I've kind of given my whole synopsis of this film. And I look forward to giving my portrayal of Jimmy Smith in this fantastic song. And I hope you enjoy it when you see it, and I thank you very much for watching. This is Alexander Hall, right here, over and out. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.